Hello, I'm Mark Griffiths from Wrexham AFC, and welcome to another hashtag Ask Wrexham podcast, a podcast where we look to answer your questions. We use the hashtag on Twitter on match days, and it's a fantastic way to interact with you guys, but you have embraced it so much and made it what it is that we end up with lots of brilliant questions we don't get around to. And also, there are some which are such great answers, questions, that even though we answer them in the broadcast, we think it's probably worth going over it again with a different audience. So here goes. Right, firstly, streaming. Chris Mitchener says, great news. Oh, I'm not close enough to the screen, I can't read it. Great news on the new broadcasting stream. Any idea how other countries, American flag, can stream the matches? Well, yeah, as far as I'm aware, there is no geo-blocking or anything on this. This is a international and local fans alike can stream it. In fact, if you have a look on the club website, we now do have the details of the streaming soft launch, so the Eastleigh game will be the first one. The key things to understand from this, and please remember, this is the key thing, remember, this is no longer now Wrexham Player providing streaming, so you've got to register with the National League, and also any comments, concerns or problems on the day, you've got to go to them now, not us. But that basically is what the situation is for the moment. It says it's a 2-week soft launch with a discounted price of £4.75. So, yeah, that seems to be what it is. So, I hope it satisfies you all. There's a few more questions on streaming as well, because Paul Bell says, with the announcements of the streaming option, are we all going to be the play-by-play announcers? That's the Wrexham Player audio commentary team for the live stream as well, or are we going to have to need what we do when matches are on ESPN and use Wrexham Player for audio while streaming the video? Well, I'm pretty sure that the audio commentary team will not be doing the commentaries on the streaming. The away games, I now assume I'm sure it will now be the away team, the home team's commentators. So I assume it'll be Eastleigh's commentary on Saturday. With the home games, well, we have a great media team. We have lots of other people who do commentaries, and so it'll be the other dedicated members of the media team who I'm sure will be doing those commentaries, and we will stick to the audio commentaries. So it's a different skill, and we're quite well established now. So there may be some crossover occasionally, I'm sure, but generally, yeah, we in the home games we've got our own excellent team who can handle that. Topher says, is the thought that this international National League interest is fleeting? Will this interest be in League Two if Wrexham increase? Does it make sense for the National League to care about international fans who won't be there in 6 months? That's an interesting one, isn't it? That I think it's reasonable to say that Wrexham has been the catalyst for streaming to happen. No question about that. Although I wouldn't say we are on our own in this. I mean, clubs like Notts County have also been very enthusiastic to offer something to their fans. I certainly think that's true in the sense that, I mean, this massive eruption of support for Wrexham across the world has come about because of Wrexham, not because of National League football. Now, there's always, I think, going to be it's a terrible word to use, residue of support, I think, for the National League, because a lot of people have looked at it and thought, oh, this is interesting and fun and authentic, which I think is the great strength of low league football in Britain. You know, you watch a VAR game on the World Cup or in the Premier League and you don't know when a goal goes in whether it will stand or not. You don't know whether to celebrate it or not. In a National League game, you watch the game, ball goes in, you can look at the ref, look at the linesman, you know whether it's a goal or not. You can actually celebrate, you can feel the emotions. So, you know, there's a lot to be liked about lower division football. But if you've come to support Wrexham, chances are that your support would remain with that club, I would have thought. So, yeah, I wonder if that's part of the National League's reluctance to embrace this. They feel that if we go up, maybe there won't be such an appetite for this. I don't know. There's an interesting point here. Now, Mark Griffiths, that's not me, that's a different Mark Griffiths, put out a comment basically about how we are getting some grief over the streaming. I've got to assume, I haven't seen it myself, and I would assume that we are getting grief from just like fans of banter and jealous banter, which is fine. I think that's part of the fun of being a football fan, isn't it? Winding up other side's fans as long as you're doing it nicely. I don't think there's been any serious criticism of us, but I think this does raise an important point because it talks about how our model, the Wrexham model, which was rejected until they could put their own stream up, was basically Wrexham would just share the profits 100% if we were allowed to do it and not keep anything for ourselves, because we were quite happy with that. And the reason this has come up on Ask Wrexham, because Mark didn't put it on Ask Wrexham, he does correspond with us, is because Pamela RWK did and brought in this beautiful analogy. Listeners to the commentary will be aware of our half-time pork pie fetish. Let's not call it anything else, that's what it is. And she said, so establish this for the perfect analogy for us offering to give away everything and now the National League bringing in their own system, which of course doesn't offer everybody all the money. She says, so Wrexham AFC bring lots of pork pies to the party for everyone. The host of Panorama National League decides not to share equally, even giving pies back to Wrexham, which already has plenty, and deprives hungrier teams of more to eat. Yes, it's Wrexham's greed. Well, you know what? That is not only the perfect analogy, it's so correct. I mean, we offered to give all the money away. We offered to give nothing, to take nothing from streaming, and instead of different systems being put in place. Okay, fine. There's loads of debate about this, and we've done it a million times, but I think that's a lovely analogy. Dave Chilcott said, patiently waiting for information on how to access the soft launch of the streaming platform. I've got to say, I apologise, normally I do this on Tuesdays. I've had to wait till Thursday this week. I'm quite glad that it's just this minute come out. So we're wait no more, Mr. Chilcott. The soft launch may not be a bad name for Wrexham's pre-match live commentary. What do you say, media team? I like this. The soft launch. Ease yourself into the match day with non-related chat and general bull. I think that's beautiful. I think I may adopt that. Paul Bell, Nalin, linked to broadcast, says, is there a reason that all games are played at the same time and day of the week and not staggered for media coverage in a league? Does this change as you go up the leagues? Is there hope that next year we won't have to wake up to listen to games at 4:30 a.m. next year? Well, if we go up, it would be roughly the same. I mean, in Britain, we are attached to the idea of football at 3:30 or 3 o'clock on a Saturday, despite the fact that, ironically, that wasn't necessarily always the case. Wrexham, for a long time in the past, kicked off at 3:15, for example, to fit in with miners' shifts, so they could get out of the mines, do after their morning shift, and get to the game. Anyway, that's by the by. So basically, it was always, if a game's not on TV, it's at 3 o'clock on a Saturday if it's a midweek game. And generally, that is still the case. Now, there's widespread coverage of the Premier League, obviously. But even so, you'll still find at least half the games take place on Saturday at 3 o'clock, and the rest are moved around. Some leagues don't do that, of course. La Liga tries to spread all their games so that, except for in the early points of the season when it's very hot and you can't really play sort of midday games, and they have to sort of double some up, they try to make sure the games are spread equally, so you could theoretically watch every single game in a weekend in La Liga. But Britain's never done that. Except when Amazon came in a couple of years ago, and they do this thing where they'll have 2 weekends a season where they'll spread it all out over a few days. But Britain has never done that, so it's only televised games, and there'll be more televised games if you go up to League 2, or should I say there'll be more League 2 games televised. There might not be more Wrexham games televised necessarily, so I probably think it'll be roughly the same. They'll be interested in us as Rob and Ryan's team, and we will get some live coverage, but I think it'll be roughly the same as now, as we are, in media terms. I'm not trying to make any arrogant statements about anything else, but in media terms, big fish in a small pond. The people are interested in seeing Wrexham at the moment. So I don't think it'd be too different, to be honest with you. Pamela again says, does York City, now this is all about the issues last weekend at York, does York City not trust its fans to behave with visitors in town? The memo to local businesses should have infuriated them. They want away money and refusal of service only harms them. But you can see what kind of hooligans Wrexham are. Hope they pick up their trash. Well, I'm not too sure we do, actually. I mean, there's two ways of looking at this. It was the police, I believe, wasn't it, who issued a statement saying to pubs check postcodes and eject people. I would assume that in general, although I know I've heard examples of this not happening, that landlords would judge this on the basis of, do these people look like they're going to cause trouble? For example, my father, who followed Wrexham well into his 80s, would come to the away games with me, and he'd try and get a ticket in like the main stand for away games, which would be where the home fans were, and was only ever refused entry once at Oldham. This old man with white hair and a walking stick. And they said, "Oh, you're from Wrexham," to recognise his accent, and wouldn't let him come into the main stand, which was bizarre. So, generally, I think that attitude applies across all businesses, doesn't it? Generally, they'll be all right with you. There may be, as I say, there's been some recorded instances of people being difficult to harmless Wrexham fans who gone to York for the weekend. I'm sure that would be an exception. I would hope so. There is, of course, another very important point to make here, which is about the small minority of Wrexham fans who have caused trouble. And the club have worked very hard to try and reduce that as much as possible. But the truth is that their behaviour does have repercussions for the rest of us. So, for example, there was trouble against Oldham. There's been trouble at a few matches. It seems to not be happening in the grounds really anymore because of the club's efforts. But we could have been given more seats at Oldham. But the local police said, no, we don't want an extra 500 Wrexham fans in town, because we have now, sadly, developed a reputation for causing problems. Likewise, York. I've been to York so many times in the past, there's been no announcement like this, but this time there was. So, I can sort of understand caution in a way as well, because, sadly, a small group of people who claim to be supporters of the club do things that damage the club and damage the ability of other fans to go to games, or indeed just to have a normal, nice time of it at a game. So, yeah, that's the reason why as well, isn't it, really? Topher says, who was the last Dragon to score against York? I'll tell you, and I'll show you. Leo Smith, young lad, came through the ranks. This is the only senior goal he scored for Wrexham. What a lovely finish. Wrexham winning 3-1 there back in 2017. Last time we actually went to York as well. Lovely lad, Leo. Fluent Welsh speaker. You don't get that many fluent Welsh speakers for Wrexham, to be honest with you. And Dean Keats thought a lot of him, brought him through. But he didn't quite kick on as I think maybe Wrexham had hoped. He went out on loan and did well, but he didn't quite achieve what he might have hoped to at Wrexham. I think it was unfortunate. I think there's a few players like that who are unfortunate. If they'd been at Wrexham and the budget was bigger, Wrexham probably would have hung on to them for a couple more years. Look at how we're bringing young players in now and retaining young players. And the tranche of young players who were given professional contracts last summer, that was much more than usual. So we are trying to back those sort of players now. Sadly, Leo was a couple of years older than that, and therefore we didn't hang on to him. He has been tearing it up in the League of Wales, though, so good lad. And I'm sad that he didn't quite make it with Wrexham. He is a talent, and I wish him extremely well, as we all do. Krista Berger says, how does Parky's win ratio compare with all the other manager stats? Well, I'll just tell you, Chris, I'll show you. So win ratio, best in the history of the club. He's won 62% of his games. That's kind of tasty, isn't it? Let's be honest. I want to add a slight codicil as well here, because Sam Ricketts, of course. Now, for those of you who aren't acquainted with Sam Ricketts, not a popular man at Wrexham, came in, had, well, what at the time was the shortest reign of a Wrexham manager, which was then followed by his assistant manager who had an even shorter time at the club. Really derailed what looked like a realistic promotion challenge. He left to go to Shrewsbury, Wrexham's rivals. There's lots more to that story. Let's just say you can imagine how badly that went down. He has an impressive record, but I've got to say, look, he's only had 25 games. So although I've put it in there because I've kept in all the managers' records, but let's be honest here, over 25 games, I wouldn't say that's an accurate reflection. I mean, look at how many Morel had in charge, for example. So although Ricketts is second in that, I personally would consider Morel to be the next best figure because he sustained a similar rate of wins for a much longer time. Also, if you look at it, Parkinson's a fair distance ahead of Ricketts as well. I mean, he's done ever so well. And the other point is when we look at the second column, Ricketts is the only player lower than him in terms of loss percentage. Because I've gone down the rest of the table, I haven't put that top 5 in, but basically it's similar to that. Although Dean Keats comes in fairly high. But yeah, I mean, Ricketts didn't play many games. He didn't have many games rather in charge. So again, I'd be inclined to say that 16% is remarkable compared to a manager like Andy Morel, who had a terrific record with the club. So yeah, Parkinson's done all right, to be fair to the lad. Now, Jared, and I'll point out beforehand, he's quite right to say at the bottom he's using soccer. He knows full well it's football, but just to avoid confusion, so I'll say that in Jared's defence first. As an American who's loved and fallen out of love with soccer over the years, I agree the need for high scores in any sport is what we expect, because we talked during the match of the concept of high and low scoring games and games with draws, which can be alien in some American sports. I've since wised up and accept that if it's by 1 or 20, a win is a win, and any game except a loss is a win in soccer. I like that attitude. Yes, I agree. I mean, look at me, I'm ancient. So I can remember the sort of 94 breakthrough days of American soccer where there used to be a lot of weird stuff in the media. Now, I think part of that is fear of the sort of interloper sport coming in, maybe not feeling comfortable, some people, with that being successful. I think there's a certain sort of aggressive style of journalism in parts of American sport as well. I used to be into boxing quite a bit and read a lot of boxing journalism, which was very high standard, by the way, and also would reflect that sometimes. And you'd see some very odd sort of denigrations of football, almost like it was a sort of crusade that the American journalists have to reject this thing. The main one I always remember and was commonly cited was football's not a real sport because you can't use your arms, and sport has to be a sort of a holistic experience where you can use any part of your body, which I mean bewilders me, really. I mean, that is so illogical and nitpicking, and goalies use their arms anyway, and baseball hitter can't use their body, can they? Well, they can't be seen to use their body to get a walk to first base. Strange things like that, and I did wonder in a way whether it was partly a sort of cultural fear of American sports being quite enclosed and therefore safe from outside intrusion. At that point, you didn't tend to have people coming from Cuba and Puerto Rico as in, say, MLB, as far as I could see, much. So there was a sort of enclosed sense to American sports, and I wonder whether, like in Australia, there was a barrier that had to be broken down in terms of it being seen as a sport which is played by Americans rather than a sort of immigrant sport, perhaps. I know in Australia there was a lot of difficulty breaking that down, really, as well, until about the 90s, maybe later. The idea that clubs would often in Australia be Yugoslavian, Croatian, Serbian, Greek, and it would be the game for immigrants. Australians played Aussie rules, rugby league, rugby union, cricket. I think there was something of that, perhaps, a fear of the interloper. Maybe this is also, trying to say this is the Hispanic sport, and American sports are different. I would assume that's pretty dead. I certainly haven't seen that sort of thing for a long time. The notion of having to have high scoring sports as well, I think in a way, I don't know, I mean, obviously I'm the worst person to judge this, but I can't help thinking that's a little bit reductionist to say that Americans need that. And I say reductionist, I mean reductionist partly by some parts of American media. American sports people are as sophisticated as anybody else. They don't just go for the cheer of the home run or the touchdown. There's more to the sport than that, and they know that as well as anybody else would. I find it slightly strange to suggest otherwise. There's a nice point actually in a moment with, hang on, let's see. I'll go through all of these. Oh yes, Wisdom of Robert though says the NHL's never been the same since they did away with the draw. Nothing worse than seeing the teams coast to get the tie point, then fight for the extra point in overtime. So I think, I hope I understand this right, Robert. You get a point for a draw, a tie, but then you get to play again to get extra points to win. And yeah, so like, well, it's an even game. Let's just accept this and then push ourselves in overtime once we've all got the points at 1 point each. I mean, I can imagine that being extremely galling. A bit like extra time in football when teams are too scared to make a mistake and they accept penalties. So yeah, a draw can be fun. A draw can be good. When you're 3-0 down, you get a draw. That feels fabulous. Yeah, I guess that's the British way of looking at it. Also, I suppose that's also you have cricket. You know, if a test match lasts 5 days, 3.5 days gone. I know, don't talk to me about the recent test match England played in Pakistan, because that was just insane and unlike any cricket ever. That was amazing. But generally, 3.5 days into a 5-day test match and you've lost and you somehow cling on and draw, that's a brilliant achievement. So, you know, a draw can be a wonderful thing. Maybe in Britain we're slightly more attuned to that because of having those sorts of sports. I don't know. Britt Garner says that I'm holding down the fort trying to fairly represent North American fans. We appreciate the nuances. I do hope so. I know I'm going to be ignorant in a lot of areas, but I think it's only fair to try and be even-handed. And he says, for me, scores are fun to watch in US football and basketball, but a near miss on a goal in soccer gives a huge rush as well. Yeah, I agree. I've got to be honest. Basketball, I can appreciate it as an amazing athletic endeavour, and I can also appreciate it as an incredible aesthetic thing to look at on the screen. I'm not denigrating basketball at all, but I've never been able to get into it. And I think, ironically, it's a reverse of this games have to be high scoring idea. To me, it feels a little devalued that there's so many points. It seems to me that at the high level of basketball, the players are expected to score, and the important moment is when they fail to score. And that's so alien to me. I've never been able to get into it. I'm not saying that means I'm right. Probably it's a failing on my part. But I always remember when I was a little kid, Channel 4 started up in Britain. Its remit was to be different, and it tried a lot of different sports. And one of them was they would show the final quarter of a British basketball game live on a Monday night. And I loved watching that. But I've got to be honest, the reason I watched it was because it was more like football, because they weren't very good. The British players weren't good. So most of the time they'd get the ball, they wouldn't score. These games were more low scoring, and to me, okay, attuned to the British way of doing things, when someone scored, it felt exciting. You know, I can tell you that, you know, Mullin scored a hat-trick against Farnborough, and I find that that's the wavelength I'm on, not somebody scored, you know, 30 points or whatever you could in basketball. It is a different mindset, isn't it, really? And as well, I do quite like this, actually. Eric Edens says, for me in southern USA, it's always been weird to the millions of people, that millions of people will watch cars go in hundreds of circles and love every second of it, but a 0-0 soccer game is awful to them. I think that's a fair commentary, to be fair. I'm moving on before I get in trouble. It's also pointing out as well, which I think touches on the point you've been making, in USA watching soccer is a bit counterculture to your average American. Your average American watching Wrexham is not your average American. I mean, I agree, and that's why I get annoyed by the sort of cliches that people often say about American football fans, because in Britain, people will look down on that and try and make out it's some sort of comical thing where they don't know what they're talking about. They call it soccer ball, and, you know, that sort of silly comment, which really annoys me, to be honest. But I see it a different way in that I've been to MLS games. Well, okay, one game, and it seems to me it was a New York Red Bulls and New Jersey Red Bulls, and I thought the fan culture was amazing. And every time I've read about MLS, that's one of the things that really fascinates me. Or I look at videos on Copa 90 and things like that. It is very much for people who want to embrace a slightly more idiosyncratic approach to following sport, and there's this healthy, and I mean that in both pejorative and non-pejorative sense of the words, ultra culture to create atmosphere without the violent overtones, which is really impressive and is looking to take the best ideas from around the world and mix with their own ideas. And it is, for me, fascinating. And American football fans, I mean, soccer, fascinated me anyway, way before Rob and Ryan, because to me, it was more people who were a bit counterculture and a bit different, looking to find their way into this sport and find an interesting mixture between old world tradition and American approach, and I really, really like it. I think it's good. I think it's better than the old NASL, sort of dancing girls and fireworks approach, which in Britain, despite the fact that we poo-poo the idea of America and North America have been able to contribute at all to soccer, we copied. You had lots of cheerleaders in the 90s and the 80s, as if that somehow made it an occasion, just that on its own, just 10 poor, scantily clad girls in pom-poms freezing in December in Scunthorpe was supposed to make it razzmatazzy. If you don't understand something, you can't take the benefits from it, is my argument. Anyway, I've finished banging on about that and talking about America when I should say North America, and I apologise. Let's move on, shall we? Okay, let's not move on. Beg your pardon. Lee, I love this. I've been looking forward to answering this. What's a wanderer? Yes. Foreign to us North American lions, tigers and bears. Right. Yes. Very different sort of nomenclatures, aren't they, in North American sport and in British and then again in European sport. Right. There are general rules of thumb, but as always, that word I keep coming back to when I talk about football, idiosyncrasies. There's loads of idiosyncrasies in British sport and in football. So, usually a United will be a club which sometime back in the mists of the past has been formed from the amalgamation of more than one local team. If I give you an example, Scunthorpe, I just mentioned, they were called Scunthorpe and Lindsay United, which wasn't Scunthorpe and some woman. Well, that's another little town nearby. Bournemouth, who are in the Premier League now, AFC Bournemouth, used to be known as Bournemouth and Boscombe. So sometimes you'd have that sort of thing. So United often denotes that at some point more than one club's come together and the name they've agreed to is the town United. Wanderers and likewise Rovers, teams of those sorts of names, genuinely is as basic as they travel around. They go around and play football. So it's as basic as that. So Bolton Wanderers wander around the country, taking their boots with them and playing footy. Town, I guess, is self-explanatory, isn't it? Wrexham isn't encumbered by any of this stuff. It's just Wrexham. There are some quite strange ones as well. Crewe Alexandra, named after Queen Alexandra. Northwich Victoria, named after Queen Victoria. Obviously, they were created at those points and decided they wanted to name themselves after them. A bit like Aberdeen Beaver. That's not a real team, sorry, I'm just being stupid. Other names, my mind's gone blank. What else was I thinking about? Charlton Athletic, so Athletic will be like an athletic club. I suppose Wrexham, if you look at them, could be called Athletic. There was a brief spell where Wrexham had problems and had to sort of rename itself. This is going back over 100 years, before the Football League days, where we were called Wrexham Olympic. So again, I assume teams called Olympic were sort of trying to say we have certain links with the Olympic ideals of exercise being a positive thing. So it's that sort of thing. I'm trying to think any other ones I've missed out. There are probably some really obvious ones. Sheffield Wednesday and the less well-known Welsh team Abergavenny Thursdays, I believe, are linked to either work or training practices. I should have checked this beforehand. Sheffield Wednesday, I think, when they made by apprentices at factories who had Wednesdays off, so they'd meet on Wednesday to play. I could be completely wrong, but it's something along those lines. I think I better leave it that rather than just sit here and go ooh hum hum hoo. But I don't know Plymouth Argyle. I don't know Argyle. I'm not sure about. A Scottish Argyle, isn't it? Why are they called that? I don't know. Aston Villa was named after a house in Aston, Birmingham. That seems reasonable enough, doesn't it, really? And then a lot of the clubs that are called AFC at the start, like AFC Halifax Town, AFC Telford United, AFC Bournemouth, tend to be teams that have had a problem, have gone out of business, and have then had to restart. They're often allowed to restart at the same level or slightly lower down, but they have got to change their name. It's a FA rule. It's a different company, and so they may retain their players, but they have to change their name. So Telford United went out of business, became AFC Telford United. Chester, by the way, Chester were Chester City, and when they went out of business, reformed as Chester and were dropped down a few leagues now to fight their way back up again. So, yeah, that's it, I think, really. The Welsh team Airbus was started off as the works team for the Airbus factory, which is in Broughton, near Wrexham. TNS, the dominant team of the Welsh League, were called were called Llansanfraid because they were in the village of Llansanfraid on Mechan. They were bought up by a wealthy chap who worked in IT, had the IT company, and so he bought them, moved them, and gave them the name Total Network Solutions, which was his company's name. Then there was a rule passed that you can't have advertising, as the name of a club, so they kept the TNS, and they're now the New Saints because the previous nickname was the Saints. The Bears, Lions, etc. has never caught on in Britain as such. In football, it hasn't, at least. But you do see it in other British sports, and I think this links to what I said about pom-poms and cheerleaders, or we'll just take something from American sport because somehow they feel it gives it a little bit of glamour and glitz, which I don't think is totally linked up. So rugby league has always been a traditional working class northern sport, rebranded itself as a summer sport with a super league, and the teams all changed their names. So for example, Leeds became the Leeds Rhinos. There are no rhinos in Leeds. I mean, why? I just don't get it. Cricket did the same. Cricket's had an interesting sort of 20 years where it's developed new, more more exciting, dramatic formats of the game. And so Lancashire County Cricket Club, the traditional team that play in front of 20 people, all wearing whites, will also have their short format teams, Lancashire Lightning with bright red kit with lightning on it. And they're playing at night in front of much bigger crowds under the floodlights. It feels like a different game, and the approach is different, and the nature of it is different as well. So that has crept in some sports, but it hasn't in football, to be honest. Right, let's move along. Topher, I keep hearing Notts County back on top, but not too worried about that. How many times do we say that before we are worried? Fussed, sorry, I misread that. That is me, that is my fault. I'm really confident we're going to win the league, and so I do keep saying that. I do accept that as a valid point, Topher. Notts County are continuing to stick with us. I still feel that there'll come a point where we'll burn them off and start to open up a gap. I think it might take a little bit longer, not least because we've got a much tougher run of games coming up than they have. So, we'll have to stick at it for a bit, but I do think over the course of the year, I think we'll have too much for them. Plus, it looks like they've got quite a battle in January to hang on to their superstar striker who scored so many goals, Longstaff, because there's a Football League team sniffing after him. And unlike us, I don't think they have the financial muscle to say, well, if you offer $500,000 for Paul Mullen, we're going to say no. But that's a fair comment, though. It's a fair comment. They are putting up an excellent scrap. I am slightly surprised, as we have done very well. On similar grounds, Tony, hang on, I'm sorry, I keep leaning across the screen like this. Tony Shell, beg your pardon, Tony, you can read your name then, says, are Wrexham losing ground? We drew against York while Notts had a convincing win. All right, well, my default position is no, because I just genuinely think that over the course of a season, we will open up a gap. Also, I would strongly argue that that's just one weekend, and I think I saw someone else tweeting in reply to this that over the last 5 games, Notts County have dropped more points than we have. No, I don't feel overly concerned by that. That's just one weekend, isn't it? Although there are other issues that we need to have a little think about. Jeff Lang, for example, points out, well, he suggests that we're not a team at the moment that would give you confidence in the playoffs. A team happy to play with the ball on the floor at home, but don't seem to have the confidence to do the same away. And we will look at this in a moment, because there's other issues about home and away form. So I'll address those as well, Jeff, and then come back to your point. Because Rex American Idiot says, not overly concerned, but it's definitely become a tale of two streaks, home versus away. An unlucky streak is harder to break psychologically. We need to find our away mojo in the second half of the season. I agree with that, totally. I would argue that our away form might be... I think we've had harder games away from home than at home as well. And I think as well that the remarkable rhythm we've struck up at home has made good away form look inferior, because it's not as good as the home form. So I don't feel overly worried by it. I feel like the Boreham Wood game was a bit of a breakthrough. I thought that was the point where in away games we started to play a bit more like our normal selves. Now I admit that since then we haven't necessarily been racking up the points. We drew at Wealdstone and that was a bit of an off day, I agree, but we looked, unlike in other away games where we looked a little vulnerable, we never looked like conceding a goal that match. It was just whether we could nick one. Likewise, I thought really at York, where, you know, O'Connor scores and it's like, great, we've won, brilliant. And then a deflection means we haven't. So a little bit of misfortune there, perhaps. I think it's going to click more, and I think there will be a lot of games against teams nearer the bottom of the table coming up and away from home where we will start to rack those up. Spitball idea. Don't know how to explain the away struggles. I have to think Parky figures it out soon. As long as we keep picking up points, I still think we're in a strong position this season. Up the Reds, yes, I totally agree. Spitball idea. Personally, I would not say struggles. I would say, as Rex American Idiot suggests, not really concerned. Not overly concerned. It is something, but it's not something to be too concerned by. It's not struggles, I would say. Yeah, we've only lost 2 games when we were away from home this season. Going back to Jeff, though, he said about not a team that I'd give confidence in the playoffs. Jeff, I totally follow what you're saying there. Let's just avoid the playoffs by winning it, is my argument. Also, remember, all right, what if we don't win the league? We're still going to have to finish 4th to have an away playoff at any point. So, you know, that great home form, you know, I assume if we don't win the league, we ought, looking at the gap between us and 4th already, to be having a home semi-final to get into the final. But I don't want, after last season, I don't want that. I think Wrexham have managed to ingrain culturally the idea that playoffs are horrible and something goes wrong, so let's avoid that. Yeah. Now then, Matt Chappert says, can you talk about the AAA highlights? I'm a supporter of a League One club and I wish we had something like it. They're awesome. Yes, they are awesome. Now, Amy Davis produces those and she does an absolutely outstanding job. I'll tell you, for me, a real measure of their quality, you go back to before we welcomed Wrexham, when our figures across YouTube got boosted. AAA was still performing at the levels it is now, pretty much. I mean, it's had a bit of a boost, but it was already massively popular because it is so good. Absolutely brilliant. I think, Matt, in some ways, it shows that even when we're talking about big professional clubs, you still need people with the vision and the imagination and the skills to carry that sort of thing out. And luckily with Amy, we have. Because, you know, there's a lot of clubs with professional media team members who are not producing stuff like that. Yes, absolutely. I've spoken to Amy, and Amy actually offered to come on the podcast, which is a brilliant idea. I said don't because I was about to do it half an hour after she contacted me. I'd then been a bit under the weather, so I apologise, Amy. I probably could have had you on this. However, I did say to her that I think maybe it would be better if on Dragonheart or something like that we actually devote a proper section looking at AAA and the process and her reasons for doing it, her backgrounds and her skills. But yes, Matt, you're exactly right. I mean, it's broadcast quality. I'm an amateur. I mean, come on, look at this setup. I'm doing my best, but I'm an amateur and I'm leaning across all the time to look at my screen because I can't see it properly because I've set it up wrong. You know, Amy's not an amateur. It's a professional broadcast quality piece of work, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I'm just delighted that we have something like that, which can really draw people into the club in a different way to how a documentary does. Massive kudos to her, and massive kudos to Colin Henry's, Ollie Williams, who you know, sort of like were able to facilitate it. It's just quality stuff, and a delight. Tim K says, "What's your favourite place on the road to do commentary at?" Compare. Right, that is a great question. Well, I've seen a few. I've done it at big grounds. I mean, obviously, in terms of facilities, Wembley's quite nice. You should get free grub there as well. Can't argue with that. Not that I'm obsessed with food or anything. Sometimes it's the welcome that you get. Some clubs are incredibly friendly. So that's interesting. I miss going to Kidderminster, where you'd be at the back of the main stand. It wasn't that big a stand. And there were always idiosyncratic characters. Next time Andy Parkinson's commentating with us, give us a prod, Tim. Tim or Tom? Tim, because we'll reminisce about... We've had some odd experiences at Kidderminster with the fans in front of us, with scaffolding falling onto the pit, all sorts of strange things. But favourite away ground is a tricky one, and weirdly, the less favourite ones come to mind more easily. I don't know. Wow, this is useless, isn't it? Kidderminster's starting to feel like it might be the one I go for, you know. I quite like Tranmere because it's nice and high up, and in a weird way, I value things like the size of, you know, the amount of real estate I get on the desk. Am I cramped? Am I squashed trying to fit all the equipment on? Tranmere is quite spacious, old-fashioned but spacious. I tell you what, another very weird one is Gateshead, which is a small club with a pitch at an athletic stadium. So the view of the pitch is poor. There's a running track going around it, but it used to be it's Gateshead International Athletic Stadium. It used to be one of the main places in the 80s when Britain had a load of brilliant middle distance runners, where they would show all these big athletics meets live on terrestrial TV on a Friday night. Seb Coe, Steve Ovett, Steve Cram. It was a massive sort of cultural place in my childhood. Gateshead, you know, being on the TV, and the facilities are weird because it's got the most enormous press boxes that you could imagine, but they're sort of underpopulated because there's like 600-700 people there in this big stadium, and you don't need that much space for the press. So I've had private booths at Gateshead, and then sometimes I've been in the crowd, and they're very friendly. You know what? I'm going Gateshead. Gateshead, Kidderminster. I'll think more about this and probably come up with something completely different. I've done Sheffield United once, and that was good. Again, old-fashioned, big facilities. But the reason that sticks in my head is somebody phoned me up halfway through, and I thought it was a local radio station I was reporting for, and somebody trying to order a pizza off me. So, you know, that sticks in my head. I'll think more about this, and I'm sure I'll come up with some more. All right, Jared Phelan. We were talking about afterburners. And he said, "Who's the fastest Wrexham player you've ever seen live?" Right, now then, here's some questions, because we answered this at the time, and I suggested Kevin Russell in his first spell for Wrexham was incredibly fast with the ball at his feet. He scored a lot of goals in 2 seasons for Wrexham, and then left and went to Leicester, and he was a cracking player. Rooster was Kevin Russell. I also suggested Chris Armstrong, who went on to play for Spurs and Crystal Palace, who was remarkably fast, bursting down the line. But we had some good suggestions as well. Gavin France says Lee Jones was very fast. He certainly was. Lee Jones, a real whippet, incredibly fast, made his reputation as a teenager in cup ties, like when he scored at West Ham, and as a result got a big move to Liverpool. So he was a very, very fast player. Jeff Lang said Brian Tinian was lightning. Young pups won't remember him. Well, Jeff, I'm afraid then by my definition, your definition, and this is something I didn't expect to say, call me a young pup. I don't remember Brian Tinian. I'm aware of him. In fact, my PE teacher used to talk about him loads, talking about him dribbling down the wing. He used to say if he left the gate open, he'd dribble off the pitch and down the hill into town, because he loved having the ball so much. But yes, I mean, people talk great things about Tinian, who went off and played in the NASL, of course, afterwards with a lot of star players, as did Harvon Griffiths, Wrexham's legendary manager and player. But yes, there have been some great fast players we've had. You know, pace is such an asset. I mean, not just strikers. Aaron Hayden's very quick at the moment at the back. You know, he can really move. But yeah, pace is such a key attribute. Blind Ref, we talked about acceptable kit. Somebody said, can you wear a cowboy hat? And he cleared it up saying, player can wear a cowboy hat as long as it's not dangerous. I think any hat would be suitable, but we draw the line at any Lady Gaga outfits. I don't know, a little snack at half-time, pull a bit of bacon off. I think that sounds reasonable to me. Tim Burke says he wants Leighton to be playing in a cowboy hat if Wrexham visit the US this summer. What a beautiful idea that is, eh? Keith Scotty, any news on a levelling up fund? Honest answer, no. Just, don't know. Hands of the government, they will decide when they feel like it, or they might just ignore it, or they might do whatever. This is not a government which, shall we say, makes orthodox decisions or does things in an orthodox manner. It might not exist anymore, who knows. Let's hope it does, and let's hope we get it. Martin Legg, time now he's asking this in the York game, time for more long shots, hoping to get rebounds, or be patient and clever. Right, I would say, Martin, and I'm happy to be shot down on this, but my tactical view of this is teams in general wouldn't look at long shots as an option. I can see how in other sports that might work, but in football the problem is the offside rule. So if you're going to shoot from distance, that probably means there aren't good options ahead of you, and it probably means the opposing defence is pushed up quite a long way, and that means that if you shoot and it does bounce off the defender, the goalkeeper, there's a decent chance that the goalkeeper will be able to recover and get to the ball because the defence is high up, so the strikers, because the offside will have to be further out again. I would say football teams generally don't look at that as an option. Generally, I would say that within football, if you restrict teams to shots outside the box, you will feel that you've done well. That's really what I'm saying when I'm talking about Wrexham at Wealdstone, Wrexham at York. We didn't concede many real clear-cut chances, because to me a clear-cut chance is working and opening close enough where you've got a good chance of scoring. You'll have seen XG as something which has come into play in the last 3-4 years, an idea of from each point of the pitch in each situation, what is the actual chance of you scoring, and XG goes down enormously as you get further away from goal. So I would say that in general in football people would see that as more an act of desperation to be trying long range shots, unless certain circumstances where you might fancy it. If it's very wet, the ball might be slippery, they might think it's going to come off the keeper. If there's a strong wind behind you, I've definitely seen players shooting from further out than you'd expect, or more often simply because they think with the wind behind them, or a crosswind that might deceive the goalkeeper, that they might cause some problems. And footballs have got a lot lighter as time's gone on. They wobble more. Speaking as a goalkeeper myself, and in my old days, I was maybe lucky. I didn't really play when the ball got as light as it is now. There are certain sort of configurations of balls, especially in the World Cups, where they were so light they really would shift around and people would be trying pot shots from distance because it was difficult for goalkeepers. When you see goalkeepers punching the ball away when you think they could probably have caught it when it's a shot, often it's because, and in Europe maybe a little more than Britain, although coaching is changing now, a lot of goalkeepers are coached, don't take the chance of trying to catch it and fumbling it. Just get behind it and get your fist behind it and get it away. Don't bother about trying to grab it. Something which commentators don't like and fans don't like often. But yeah, I'd say generally. Oh, the other thing, of course, you might have a player with a great shot on. I mean, Wrexham have got Jordan Davis, we've got Luke Young. These are players who can drill it from distance. so those players might fancy taking it on more. But generally, yeah, it's if their goalie looks dicey, if the goalie looks a bit weak, you might try and test him out a few times, make him make a few saves, see what he's like. Generally, I would say, as a manager, usually, if a player is taking long shots, they might say, well, why are you doing that? If you've got a game plan, just because it's wet, doesn't mean that you shouldn't stick to your game plan and try some sort of freak tactic, hoping it'll come off. I say, when I said wet before, I don't know if people do have that much wind. I have seen players definitely having a go because they're thinking the wind's behind me, the ball might wobble around, I might have a chance. I've definitely seen players do that. Thane Emrys, I can never say your name, and I do apologize. Bertine. Now, this is very flattering to me. Word perfect Shakespearean quotations. I did throw in some Romeo and Juliet the other week, but I paraphrased it, so I've got to say I'm sorry, but you're flattering me there. Mini monologues in French, naturellement. Mark Griffiths is commentating as something else. It's not commentating. Hey, the question, the forefront of the minds of two dirt-tired Cambridge, Massachusetts residents, can he narrate half a minute of football in Welsh? And I'm ashamed to say no. My Welsh is very rudimentary. My wife's first language is Welsh, and she tries to tell me it's better than I think, but I really don't think it is. So I could have a stab at French, German and Spanish, but shamefully my own language is not something I'm confident in. I believe I can't pick up my accent, my own accent, and I don't tend to pick up Wrexham accents. I've found this, I don't know if it's me or just general, you don't recognise your own accent as much as alien accents, if you will. I'm told I sound very Welsh, and one instance where this happened and made me a bit sad, if I'm honest with you, is that years ago I was commentating at Chesterfield, and at half time a chap sitting behind me tapped me on the shoulder and started to talk to me in Welsh, and I didn't know what he was saying to me, and it turned out he was a producer on S4C, the Welsh language channel's football programme Scorio, which is brilliant. And when I was in university, it would show all the Italian, Spanish games when they weren't on British television anywhere else. I got a little community of my mates hooked on it because they never got to watch European football, and there it was. As long as you didn't mind it being in Welsh commentary, every Monday night there'd be an hour of highlights. It was a wonderful show. Still going now, focuses more on Welsh domestic football now, not totally. And it turned out he was a producer at Scorio, and he was saying, he assumed from my accent that I spoke Welsh and was offering me a job on Scorio. I'd have loved that, but I can't speak Welsh, sadly. I can say Dwi'n hoffi coffee, so if I become homeless, I can say I'd like a coffee, but beyond that, I'm afraid I'm limited. My wife tries to say nice things and big me up, but Neil, of course, Neil Williams and the commentary team, he is a fluent Welsh speaker, as you can see when he does a Quiban Terfynol, our Welsh language podcast. But I'm afraid, I'm ashamed to say, I don't really even have conversational Welsh. I can get through it, Spanish, German, French, but yeah, my own language, shamefully, is the one I struggle with. That is not good. Chris Johnson, could I bring back the world famous players versus fans versus cats score prediction we used to do, mixed in with a pork pie knockout championship? Obviously with no harm to the cats. Well, obviously, I'm a big cat fan. I used to have some of my cats who would do a weekly prediction tournament where I'd get a player to predict the results of 3 games that the coming weekend, a fan to do likewise, and then one of my cats where I'd put 3 bowls of meat out. One would signify home win, one would be a draw, one would be a away win, and whichever one they ate from first. I've got to say, Chris, and thank you, Chris, for your loyalty, and I think you've asked this before a while ago. I think it's reasonable to say it had a very small, loyal band of supporters. It used to sort of, I'll be honest with you, frustrate me a little bit. I used to love doing them. They tended to get 300 people watching them at best, and the figures dipped as it went along, and it demoralised me a little bit. Maybe I should try it again. I don't know. Poor Mystic Stufa, because the cats who are no longer with us, sadly. But Mystic Stufa was my favourite, because he was magical. He was very good at guessing the scores. He only had one eye, bless him. We got him from the rescue, as we do all our cats, and he was an absolute flaming legend. And I used to put weird sort of spooky music in the background when he approached the dishes, because he was Mystic Stufa and he knew what was going to happen in the future. Different story altogether. I'm tempted. Barcode Mark, any news on Max Cleworth? He hasn't had a game in ages. Well, to be fair, Mark asked this question last Saturday, and since then, Max has been given a contract extension. I think it's purely to give him a bit of a rest. He has done brilliantly. He is a massive prospect for the future, and he is clearly the sort of stuff that will work in higher divisions. Max is very much a prospect for the future. He's had more first-team experience than I think anybody anticipated, including him, at this point in his career, and therefore I think the club have decided with Tunnicliffe there that they can give him a bit of a break and just let him settle a bit. You don't want to overexpose a player. He had a couple of games near the end before they gave him a break where things maybe weren't quite going right. So to be fair to him, I don't think it was necessarily his performance as much as the shape we were playing was asking a lot, and goals were coming in on his side of the pitch. I don't think it was particularly his fault, but he might start taking it to heart. I think it was sensible to give him a little rest. But he'll be back, and he'll be back a lot for Wrexham. He's a brilliant player, brilliant prospect, lovely lad. And now Martin Bradshaw, I think this is director, I think at Wrexham AFC more than me. When you're going to sort the facilities in the ground so that fans can actually buy a drink or food without waiting 30 minutes plus a half time and missing the match. Well, Martin, look, firstly, I'm not qualified to answer this, but I do think there's a response I can make which would be reasonable and the club would be happy with, which is we've grown quicker than our facilities. As we've talked about this before, and Sean Harvey did in that interview with Dragonheart he did last season, the scaling up of Wrexham Football Club is pretty much unprecedented, from going from a non-league team to a team with massive international interest, and the club suddenly is selling out constantly. The racecourse is a place we love and a huge part of the fabric of Wrexham Football Club, but the infrastructure is poor. There's no way of getting around that. And you may have noticed, I'm sure, that after the takeover, one of the first things that Rob and Ryan did was put money into the concourses to try to improve it. But still, it is a genuine case of, when the stands were built, apart from the Macron stand, which is newer, there was no real thought of monetising the crowd. It was just a place to watch footy, and you could have a snack or get a drink at some point. And so that is the issue, is the infrastructure. Now, building the new COP will not only offer new infrastructure, I think it will also give scope to improve infrastructure in other parts of the ground, because things which are currently in those stands could be transferred to new facilities in the COP, giving more scope to improve the experience of fans who are looking for refreshments. So it is a case of, when we had 3,000 people coming to games, you were all right, and now there's 10,000, and sadly that's put the system under strain a little bit. And it's not really, to be fair, the club's fault. It's infrastructure which needs to be improved, and the owners are clearly aware of that, and clearly already have addressed parts of it and will address it more as time goes on. And Edward Walker, Walker, hang on, I have to creep right in here. Walker, I'm going. I just showed that, was it Stadium 974, is it? In Qatar, which is made out of packing cases. And Pamela, RWK, looked at that because he'd said, is it worth sending to Coventry? And she said, I feel so badly for Coventry. She says, he thank God for the passion and foresight of people of Wrexham and wisdom to invest in the racecourse. What do you think, Mark Griffiths? 100% agree. I feel for Coventry. I've had a horrible time travelling from pillar to post. That stadium, of course, is going to be dismantled and put up somewhere else. Decision not been made yet, I believe. Uruguay are looking at it as part of their 2030 World Cup bid, but I don't think any decision been made. Yeah, it's a horrible situation for Coventry, and we are very fortunate at Wrexham, and that's twofold, isn't it, really? The trust and the fans in protecting the ground, and then our massive stroke of fortune, or reward for the good work that's been done, that then Rob and Ryan have stepped in and properly protected it. But we could easily have lost the racecourse. The racecourse could easily be sort of garden centre or something now, and it's due to the fans who battled in the dark times that it isn't. Right, I reckon that's all of them. That was a marathon Ask Wrexham, wasn't it? No, there's one last one, I beg your pardon. Trey Campmeyer says, having seen a lot of social media about the Wrexham ladies and the great performances recently, great to see Ryan and Rob's support, the gals. My question is, do they play in the same league as the men, and do the clubs in the National League all have women's teams? No and no. I think somebody put that as an answer, I seem to remember. No, not all National League teams will have women's teams. Women's football, sadly, is something developing. It's had a boom lately, but it's been developing fairly slowly for a number of years. Gladly, a lot of the moronic prejudice is now being beaten down, and frankly, North American women's football, I would argue, is at a more progressed stage of development than British women's football. And Welsh football lags behind English football, I think, in terms of infrastructure. So certainly, no, a lot of National League teams won't have women's teams. Some women's teams are not attached to men's teams as well, although in Britain they tend to be, not always. Isn't there aren't there a couple, or there were a couple of teams in the Women's Premier League who are not linked to a men's football club? I don't know, the weird thing that Real Madrid, rather than start a women's team, bought an existing successful team who had the remarkable name Las Tacones Altas, the high heels, and just rebranded them as Real Madrid. There's a lot to unpack in that one. But no, a lot of teams don't. And in terms of structure, it's totally different. Wrexham women are in the Welsh pyramid, not the English pyramid. So Wrexham are playing in the English system. The women are playing in the Welsh system, which in itself is, like I said, developing and still in a fairly nascent stage. So we were in the second division last season. If we'd got promoted, that was our first season in that system, we would have turned down promotion because we need to continue working on the infrastructure of the club ourselves for the women's side of it. But exciting times for the women's team, and it'll only become more exciting as Rob and Ryan continue with the club. Right, that is it now. That was long, wasn't it? Oh, I need to lie down. Right, it's always a pleasure. Remember, Eastleigh on Saturday, so get those Ask Wrexhams in again. And a special request as well. We had a few World Cup ones, so we'll do an extra World Cup Ask Wrexham on anything, whether it's linked to Wrexham or it's not linked to Wrexham. That doesn't matter. We'll do an extra Ask Wrexham podcast on the World Cup. So any of those, please send those in. That'd be fantastic. So, see you soon, muchachos. I'm Mark Griffiths from Wrexham AFC. Adios.